Well, this is all valuable, like really interesting, hearing your perspective on things, and I think that you're a pretty opinionated and outspoken guy, and I think that that's great. You know, that's what we really aim to do here. It's like get your thing and put it out there.
Okay.
You know, and so with that, you know, a large amount of people that will be viewing this are going to be people who look to, you know, they look to model successful people. You know, you are one of them. You're a very successful musician. You were just talking about, you know, your time at the Cotton Club. You know, you played with guys like Joe Frazier, you played with Jack McDuff, you played with a ton of different people. You were with Tony Braxton. You know, the names can go on and on. So, you know, if I were to come to you and just say, you know, this guy is a pretty successful guy, you know, one of the main things I would ask you would be, how do you practice? Like, when you were coming up, or if you have any insight about just your personal meditations with the guitar, like, what does that look like for you?
Well, I try to break things down into specific areas. There's, you know, skill sets, you know, like being able to play in all keys and being able to play in a variety of grooves and time signatures, developing your technique to understand what's going on. But in the kind of improvisational music that I generally have spent most of my life playing, you're dealing with forms and chords or chord changes that kind of like are like signposts along the way in the form. So if you're playing, you know, like rhythms changes, for example, you know, there's a very specific set of changes from Gershwin's tune I Got Rhythm, that there's the basis for all rhythms changes, and then a variety of substitutes. So the A section in B flat would be, you know, like 1625, 1625, and then some little kind of like connecting thing to get you to like the first and the second. The bridge usually starts on, you know, a secondary dominant chord like D7 in the key of B flat, so it's kind of like functioning as 5 or 6. So the idea of being able to hear and understand what those are when you recognize them. The specific things, part of it's like the technical thing on the instrument. The other thing is like knowing what tool is appropriate for which job. There's a lot of controversy with people that want to say that, you know, you don't really need to learn the notes, that you should just need to learn the chords. The problem with that is that the chords literally came from the scales, not the other way around. You know, historically, as our harmonic system evolved, and more specifically, if you look at something as simple as a diatonic set of chords in, say, a major tonality, you know, there's a certain pattern that emerges. The 1 chord's a major 7th, 2, 3, and 6 are minor 7, the 4 chords a major 7, the 5 chords a dominant 7, the 7 chords a minor 7 flat 5. Well, just the 12 keys, you get situations where there's replication. So, for example, C major 7 could be 1 in the key of C, or it could be 4 in the key of G. Now, using only chord tones, you cannot demonstrate the difference between those two. Because the chord tones for C major 7 are going to be identical, C, E, G, and B, in whatever configuration or inversion of voice you want. So, to demonstrate that one is Lydian and one is major or Ionian, you have to actually use the scale. Now, there are brilliant players that say they're only thinking of the chord tones, but whenever it's Lydian, C Lydian, you'll hear the F sharp. Whenever it's C Ionian, you'll hear the F natural, even if it's only as a passing tone. Now, they can call that whatever they want to call it, but ultimately they're still using that. So part of the practicing is like physically being able to play the instrument, but as a jazz musician, part of the practicing is trying to deal with the harmonic obstacle course and how you can play in such a way to make it clear. Because I know there are players that absolutely want to play ambiguously, but for me, the players that always spoke to me are the ones who play very clearly. Even, you know, players like Monk, who could use dissonance in incredibly unique ways that were very challenging to the times that he lived in. His music is harmonically incredibly clear. I mean, it's as clear as Mozart. So it's like, you know, learning how to know how to do that before you start saying, well, I'm going to avoid making it clear. Because there are a lot of players that once they master making it really, really clear, they don't want to make it clear. And, you know, to each their own. But for me, it was really important to be able to know what tools would be the ones to best use, with the overall objective being able to use any note of the chromatic scale in any chord in any situation at any time. So a lot of that's the thing of being able to hear what I call tonal gravity of a note, and no note can be defined out of its context. It's like the sound of two. If I just look at you and go two, you don't know if I mean number two.
Yeah.
I'd like to go to. I'd like to go to the store. Would you like to go to?
Yeah.
You don't know which one it means. Only the context will clarify that. So some of the practicing involves learning how to hear that within the context that you're going to use it in as many contexts as possible. And one other thing that for me personally is hugely important that I think I don't think a lot of people practice this the same way that I think is important. And that has to do with, as a composer, you actually have to work on that too. A lot of people only write songs when they're inspired, they get a little idea. Brahms used to get up every morning and write counterpoint exercises. There are skill sets to being a composer,
right,
just like there are skill sets to being a player. So I divide my time between both, practicing the instrument, and probably for the last 15 or 20 years, dividing my time also practicing being a composer, like trying to write every day. And even if, I try to make notes of ideas. I recently saw an interview with Woody Allen where he was showing the drawer next to his bed. He's pulling out napkins from restaurants and pads from hotels where he's scribbling down ideas for movies. And he says sometimes I go back 10 years later, he said Midnight in Paris. He had the title for the movie before he ever wrote the script. Because he just liked the idea. Because there was something very evocative with the title, and that gave rise to the other thing. So a lot of times it's scribbling down ideas, but other times it's just like, okay, here's a theme, can I write a contrapuntal answer to it? That's an imitation, not just writing random notes that would fit with it. Can I actually write a canon? Is it invertible? Is it, things like that. Here's a series of chords, let me voice lead them smoothly. Just a little bit of that every day. So that's another set of skills. So a lot of practicing is about acquiring skill sets and then acquiring facility with skill sets.
Right.
And usually getting a new skill set is like the first step in a long journey. That there are things I can do with skill sets now that I learned 20 years ago that I couldn't do when I first learned them.
Yeah.
And I think that's one of those ongoing processes that it's like there's if you tell somebody you're never going to learn all this, that's a real good test for a measure of your individual character. So if somebody tells you that you're never going to learn all this, does that make you want to give up, or does that inspire you because it's like, wow, this is a great adventure, I'll never get bored with it? There used to be Nietzsche had an idea called the eternal recurrence, which is scientifically proven wrong, but it's the idea that they used to believe that there was a finite amount of matter in the universe, but an unlimited amount of time. So it was simply a matter of time before this exact configuration occurred in exactly the same sequence in which you lived your life over exactly as you lived it. And the delivery of that information to you, would you consider that a horrible piece of information that's bad news, or would you consider it good news? And if you consider it bad news, then you've lived a pretty crappy life. Would you consider it great news, and you've lived a great life?
Right.
And so Nietzsche used to play with it as a way of letting you measure the value of your life. Well, similarly, it's like, when you find out that no matter how much you practice, my old teacher John Griggs told me that he heard Segovia say once, towards the end of his life, that he just scratched the surface. It's like, well, that means this is a never-ending adventure.
Right.
Not some, oh my God, awful burden. It's like, I'm never going to learn all this. Why should I even bother?
Right.
And so that, if you feel it's a burden that so you shouldn't bother, then maybe you shouldn't bother.
Right.
Because the truth of the matter is the world doesn't really need you. It's not like there's, every club on the corner wanting to have somebody come in and play.
How have you dealt with that in the past? I mean, personally, I've been rejected tons of times musically and in my other careers, but musically for you, I mean, we all go through difficult times where, maybe, you're not getting the gigs you want, the band leader isn't, doing what he's supposed to do, and you're just frustrated. Or maybe, project isn't working out the right way. How would you approach that?
Well, there's several strategies. I mean, you kind of brought in a bunch of different things. If you're not working, and you have been working a lot of different times in your life, an actress friend of mine once told me, she said, look, how many times when you had more work than you can handle, were you begging for a day off? Then you get a day off and you're sitting around like moping about the fact that you don't have any work. Take advantage of that time. That's the time to start writing like the next project or get involved. So that's one way of, because it's always a roller coaster.
Right.
I mean, in a world where someone like Herbie Hancock supposedly books himself because he doesn't have a manager representing him, I mean, you got to figure that something's seriously wrong. One of the greatest musicians to ever walk the face of the earth, and one of only two cats to ever win a Grammy for the best album of the year, not the best jazz album of the year. That record, the Joni Records, won the Grammy for the album of the year a couple of years ago. I mean, you got to figure that guy should be able to work whenever he wants to. I'm sure he can, but I heard somewhere that he's his own manager. Now, if that's true, it's like, man, it's like the notion that anybody's going to ever do this for you is absurd. You got to do it yourself. And so part of it has to do with that thing of like being able to be a self-starter, not looking for people to give it to you. Then, but in terms of somebody rejecting you, you do something really great and somebody misses it. I think it was Paul Simon I heard say this once. He said, you can't read the good reviews and not read the bad reviews. So he doesn't read any reviews. That's one strategy. The other strategy is you just don't take it personally. I mean, I remember being a kid playing in, there's a part where all the Navy bars used to be in Norfolk, Virginia, where I grew up, called Ocean View, and I'm playing in this bar, and the band leader featured me doing something, and after the set, somebody in the audience came up and said, that was pretty good, but if you would do blah, 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 it would be really great, and I got really pissed off. And there was an old guy in the band, and he said, do you mind if I talk to you? And I said, sure. He pulled me over and he said, look, I don't know what that guy said to you, and I don't want to know. But there's only two ways to interpret it. He either knew what he was talking about, or he didn't know what he was talking about. And in either event, getting pissed off at him is not an appropriate response.
Right.
Because if he doesn't know what he's talking about, why would you let what he says bother you? Matching wits with a dimwit is no great accomplishment.
Right.
On the other hand, if he does know what he's talking about, then maybe you wouldn't want to pay attention to. I remember reading a story I believe somewhere about Coltrane. Some guy who used to keep coherent playing didn't particularly like what he was doing, and then he heard him play later. I think he was playing My Favorite Things or something, and he really liked it. And said to Coltrane something about, I heard you play many times and I didn't dig it, but I really like what you're doing now. I don't know if I'm listening more carefully or if your playing's gotten better. And Coltrane looked at me and said, probably both. So, it is not just you, you're communicating with somebody, with groups of somebody, if it's an audience, and, you hope that they dig it. But if they don't, you cannot empower them to be the determiner of whether or not you're telling the truth. Because if you do, then it's like, the trial of Joan of Arc or something.
Right.
It's like, she's telling the truth and they're going to burn her at the stake anyway. It's like, it's a kangaroo court. It's like, you got to really let them make you feel bad.
Right,
so somewhere in there, you got to have enough conviction to know that you're doing great work. One last thought on that subject. Duke Ellington was given kind of a hard time when he started writing longer form, some of the suites, and particularly his sacred concerts. And I remember reading somewhere that his response was that it's perfectly fine for a critic to say that you missed your mark, but it's completely inappropriate for a critic to decide that the mark you were aiming for was the wrong mark for you to choose, because the artist has a reason for trying to do something. Now, if you try to do it and you fail, then they can say that you failed, but for them to say you should never have tried to do it in the first place, and that that's fundamentally what's wrong, even if you hit the mark, that seems to exceed the realm of what they actually